The signal came on a Tuesday morning at exactly 6:42, when most of the world was still half asleep. It did not arrive on one channel. It did not come through one satellite or one receiver. It came through all of them at once. Every radio frequency, every television broadcast, every military communication line, every civilian phone network on the planet. For about 4 seconds, every screen on Earth went dark. Then a sound filled the air. It was low and long, like something very large and very tired trying to speak. And then, slowly, words began to form inside it. Not in English, not in any human language, but within minutes, every major translation system on the planet was working on it, and within an hour the meaning was clear. Someone out there was asking for help. Now, Commander Dale Owens was in his office at the United Earth Defense Command headquarters in Colorado when the signal hit. He was on his third cup of coffee and reading a maintenance report about a broken radar array in the northern sector. When the screens went dark, he stood up slowly. When the sound began, he walked to the window and looked out at the mountains. When the first translated words came through on his desk terminal, he sat back down, read them twice, and picked up the phone. Within 3 hours, every senior military and government leader on Earth was in a secure call. The translation was confirmed. The message was from a group called the Varek Collective, an alliance of 17 different civilizations spread across a wide stretch of the galaxy. And they had been fighting a war for almost 2 years against a machine race called the Kreth. The Kreth were not living creatures. They were machines, self-building, self-repairing, endlessly copying themselves using the raw material of whatever planet they landed on. They did not want territory. They did not want resources in the way living things did. They simply consumed and moved on, like a fire that never ran out of fuel. The Varek had ships, they had weapons, they had numbers. They had been fighting longer than any of them had wanted to. And they were still losing. 3 of their worlds were already gone, not conquered, gone, stripped to bare rock and silence. 4 more were under active threat. And the Varek message said they had heard of Earth through a network of older signals traveling between stars, fragments of human radio and television broadcasts that had been drifting through space for decades. What they had picked up, and what their analysts had spent considerable time studying, was this. Humans fought in a way that was different from anything the Varek had seen. Humans, when pressed into a corner, did not look for a way out. They looked for something to hit. The call on Dale's screen was still running when a second alert came in from the southern tracking array outside Buenos Aires. Something large was descending through the atmosphere at a controlled speed, broadcasting a peaceful approach signal on the same frequency the Varek message had used. It was not a weapon. It was a ship, and it was landing. The landing site turned out to be a wide, flat stretch of open land outside Denver, which the ship seemed to have chosen with some care. Enough space, away from buildings, close enough to the defense command that a response team could arrive quickly. By the time Dale's vehicle pulled up, there were already 200 soldiers forming a perimeter, 3 news drones circling overhead, and a crowd of civilians pressed up against a hastily built barrier about a quarter-mile back. The ship was not enormous. It was roughly the size of a large building laid on its side, smooth and dark gray with no visible windows. It sat on the ground quietly, and after about 10 minutes, a section of the lower hull opened and a ramp extended. Then a single figure walked down it. The being was tall, close to 8 feet, and moved slowly, with both hands out to the sides in what was clearly meant as a gesture of peace. Its body was thin, covered in pale green-gray skin that caught the morning light in a slightly waxy way. Its face had 2 large eyes, dark and compound like an insect's, set wide on a narrow head. It wore a simple dark garment and carried nothing. It stopped at the base of the ramp and waited. Dale got out of his vehicle and walked toward it. He stopped about 10 feet away. His security team spread out behind him, weapons held, but not raised. He looked at the alien. The alien looked at him. Then it spoke in English that was careful and slightly too precise, like someone who had learned the language from recordings rather than from conversation. I am called Surath Vel. I speak for the Varek Collective. We sent the signal. We came ourselves because we did not think a signal alone would be enough. It paused. We are losing our war. We have heard about your people. We were told that humans, when they fight, do not stop until the thing they are fighting is finished. Another pause, shorter this time. We need that. We are asking for your warriors. Dale was quiet for a moment. The wind moved across the flat ground between them. Behind him, he could hear the distant sound of news drones. He thought about a lot of things in those few seconds. He thought about the political process that would need to happen. He thought about the ships that Earth did and did not have. He thought about the soldiers he would be sending into a war on the other side of the galaxy, against an enemy that consumed entire planets. He thought about all of that. And then he thought about the 3 Varek worlds that were already gone. "Come inside," he said. "We have a lot to talk about." The briefing that followed lasted most of the day. Surath Vel sat across a wide table from Dale and a room full of generals, scientists, and government representatives, and it answered every question put to it with quiet, careful honesty. The Kreth moved in large fleet formations. They did not use tactics in the traditional sense. They used overwhelming force and infinite patience, pressing forward until resistance collapsed. They had been fought to a standstill 3 times in the war's history, but each time they had rebuilt, reformed, and come back with more. They did not care about their own losses. They did not need to care. They could always build more. And the Varek had 17 civilizations in their alliance, and every one of them had been fighting as hard as they could. It was not enough. By evening, the room had grown quieter. The questions had slowed down. People were looking at the table or at the walls. Surath Vel sat still and said nothing more, because there was nothing more to say. The facts were the facts. Dale leaned back in his chair, looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then looked at Surath Vel. "How soon do you need an answer?" Surath Vel's large, dark eyes did not blink. "One of the 4 remaining worlds has perhaps 3 months before the Kreth reach it." Dale nodded slowly. He looked around the room at the people who had been listening all day. Some of them gave small nods. Some of them said nothing but did not look away. He understood what that meant. Then he turned back to Surath Vel. "Start preparing your ships," he said. "We'll have people ready." In a barracks 200 miles away, a young corporal named Kevin Briggs was cleaning his rifle when the announcement came over the base-wide channel. He set the rifle down and listened. When it was over, he sat very still for a moment, staring at nothing. Then he picked the rifle back up and kept cleaning it. His hands did not shake. He was 22 years old, and he had signed up for exactly this kind of thing, even though he had never imagined it would be quite this literal. He thought about what the commander had said about warriors. He thought about the word. He turned it over in his head for a while. Then he finished cleaning his rifle, put it away, and started packing his kit. Outside, the first transport planes were already being called in. The Varek transport ship that carried the first group of human soldiers into deep space was called the Steady Path. And it was, by any standard, a remarkable vessel. It was 3 times the length of the largest ship Earth had ever built. Its corridors were wide and cool and lit with a soft blue-green light that the Varek found comfortable and that most humans found slightly unsettling, like being inside a very large and very quiet aquarium. The ship had a crew of 400 Varek, and as of 72 hours after departure from Earth orbit, 260 human soldiers. Kevin Briggs spent the first day of the journey sitting on his bunk, trying not to stare at the walls. He was not alone in this. Most of the soldiers in his unit were doing the same thing. nor doing the opposite, walking the corridors too much, asking too many questions about the ship's systems, looking for things to do. They were not scared, exactly. They were the kind of people who had specifically chosen a life that involved being sent into difficult situations. But there was a difference between a difficult situation on Earth and a difficult situation that required a 17-day journey in a vessel you did not build, heading toward a war you had only heard about 2 weeks ago. On the third day, General Mira Vance called the entire human contingent together in the ship's largest common area. She stood in front of them without notes, without a podium, with her hands resting easy at her sides, and she talked to them for about 20 minutes. She did not try to make the situation sound smaller than it was. But she told them what she knew about the Kreth, which was considerable. She had spent the entire journey so far reading every file the Varek had shared. She told them what she expected, which was a fight unlike anything any of them had trained for. And then she said something that Kevin remembered for a long time afterward. "The Varek are good fighters," she said. "They are brave, and they have been doing this for 2 years without stopping. But they think about war the way most species think about it. They look for the point where it makes sense to stop, where the cost is too high, where holding is better than pushing. We don't think that way, and that is the one thing we have that they don't." She paused and looked around the room. "Don't let anyone talk you out of it." Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. On the 9th day, the Steady Path docked with the Varek Joint Command Vessel, a ship so large that the Steady Path fit inside its docking bay the way a rowboat fits inside a warehouse. The command vessel was called the Unyielding March, which Kevin thought was a good name, and it was the headquarters of the Varek's entire military operation in this part of the war. Fleet Admiral Soren Ka commanded it. Soren Ka was older than Surath Vel, broader, and carried itself with the kind of stillness that came from decades of responsibility. When it met Mira Vance in the docking bay corridor, it looked her over carefully, the way a person looks at something they have heard a great deal about and are now seeing for the first time. Mira looked back at it with the same expression. "General Vance," Soren Ka said, "we are glad you are here. As we have prepared a full operational briefing for your force, our standard protocols, our current defensive lines, recommended retreat corridors, acceptable loss thresholds." "I'd like to see it," Mira said. "And then I'd like to ask you something." The briefing room was large and round, with a holographic display table at the center that projected a moving map of the current war zone. Blue for Varek-held space, red for Kreth-controlled territory, and a wide gray band in between that was contested and changing. Soren Ka walked Mira and her senior officers through the document. It was thorough, careful, and detailed. It covered everything the Varek had learned in 2 years of fighting. It outlined the standard formation responses to Kreth attack patterns. It listed the corridors through which retreat was possible if a position became untenable. It specified in careful numbers the casualty levels at which a unit was expected to withdraw rather than continue. Mira read it. Her officers read it. Nobody said anything until Soren Ka finished presenting. Then Mira asked her question. "Where are the Kreth staging their next offensive push?" Soren Ka's 3 eyelids moved in sequence, a gesture that Lieutenant Owen Cruz, who had been studying Varek expressions since the ship left Earth, later described as the alien equivalent of blinking in surprise. "You wish to intercept rather than fortify?" Soren Ka asked. "Fortifying means waiting for them to choose the time and the ground," Mira said simply. "We don't do that." There was a pause in the room, and the Varek officers present were very still. The human officers were looking at the map. Soren Ka studied Mira for a long moment. Then it pulled up the Kreth movement data on the table. "Their patterns suggest a build-up here," it said, pointing to a region on the edge of the contested band. "But we do not have confirmed staging information." "Give us the full movement logs," Mira said. "We'll work with what you have." She was not asking. She said it the way someone says a thing they already know the answer to. Soren Ka looked at her for another moment, and then it gave the order to transfer the data. That night, while most of the Varek crew slept, the human officers worked. Owen Cruz set up a predictive model using the Kreth movement logs, feeding in every data point the Varek had collected over 2 years. Kevin Briggs ran supply calculations. Sergeant Donna Holt, who had been a combat engineer before she was anything else, spread physical maps across the table and drew lines on them with a marker while everyone else used the screens, because she said she thought better that way. Mira walked back and forth behind all of them, asking questions, discarding options, narrowing down possibilities. By early morning, they had a strike package. When Mira laid it out on Soren Ka's display table at the next briefing, the room was quiet for a very long time. The plan did not involve fortifying any current position. It did not involve a defensive line. It proposed hitting the Kreth staging area before the Kreth had finished building their attack formation, striking them mid-assembly where their coordination would be weakest, but using speed and precision rather than mass. One of the senior Varek officers said, carefully, that this seemed very aggressive for a first engagement. Yes, Mira agreed. Another said that the human force was small relative to even a partially assembled Kreth formation. Yes, Mira said again. There was another pause. Soren Ka had been staring at the display the whole time. It looked at Mira. It looked at the plan. It looked at the data that Owen's model had produced, which showed a narrow but real window of opportunity that no Varek analyst had identified because no Varek analyst had been looking for it. They had all been looking at the defensive lines. Soren Ka approved the plan. Later that evening, Kevin found himself standing next to Surath Vel in one of the ship's long observation corridors, and looking out through a wide viewport at the stars. They stood quietly for a while. Then Surath Vel said, in its careful, recording-learned English, "Your general. She looked at 2 years of our war records and found something in one night that we did not find in 2 years. Kevin thought about that. She wasn't looking for the same thing you were looking for, he said. Surath Vel turned its large, dark eyes toward him. What was she looking for? A way in, Kevin said. Surath Vel looked back at the stars and was quiet for a while. Then it said, very softly, We asked for warriors. I am beginning to think that word may not be large enough. Kevin did not answer. He was already thinking about the mission. His kit was packed. His rifle was cleaned. In 36 hours, they would reach the edge of the staging zone. He watched the stars drift slowly past the viewport, cold and distant and indifferent, and felt something settle inside his chest. Not excitement, not fear. Something steadier than either. The feeling of a door that had been opening slowly finally standing all the way open. He pushed off the viewport and walked back toward the barracks to get some sleep while he still could. The Kreth staging area was in a wide belt of dead space between 2 star systems, a region the Varek called the Velmaran Corridor after the 2 dim stars that anchored its edges. Nothing lived there. Nothing had ever lived there. It was just space, cold and empty, which was exactly why the Kreth used it. They did not need warmth or light or atmosphere. They needed room to assemble, and the Velmaran Corridor had plenty of it. Owen Cruz had identified the window at 412 hours into the Kreth assembly cycle. That was when their formation would be roughly 60% complete, large enough to be a real target, but not yet coordinated enough to respond effectively to an attack from an unexpected direction. The human strike force had 6 ships, 4 human vessels that had been transported aboard the Unyielding March, and 2 Varek support frigates that Soren Ka had assigned to the operation. 6 ships against a partially assembled Kreth formation that, when complete, would number somewhere between 40 and 60 vessels. Mira had read those numbers and said nothing. which was what she usually did when the numbers were what they were, and complaining about them would not change anything. Kevin Briggs was aboard the lead ship, a human vessel called the Hard Runner, a name the crew had given it informally because its official designation was a long serial number that nobody used. He was in the secondary operations room, which was smaller and quieter than the main bridge, with 4 screens showing different sensor feeds and a direct line to the bridge. His job in this engagement was to monitor the formation map and call out changes in the Kreth's response pattern as soon as they appeared. It was not a combat role. He was not shooting at anything. But Mira had told him it was important work, and he believed her, so he watched his screens and stayed very still and ready. The operation began quietly, as these things often do. The 6 ships dropped out of transit at the edge of the corridor and moved in at low power. Engines reduced, electronic signatures suppressed as much as the technology allowed. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened. The Kreth formation sat in the distance, vast and dark against the stars. Ships moving slowly into position like pieces of a machine assembling itself. They had not detected the human force yet. Or if they had not reacted. Then Mira gave the order, and the 6 ships went to full power simultaneously. The first pass was clean and brutal. The human ships came in fast from a steep angle, targeting the supply vessels at the rear of the Kreth formation, the ships that carried the raw material the Kreth used to build more of themselves. Owen Cruz ran the targeting from the lead ship's weapons station, his voice flat and precise over the comm, calling coordinates and fire solutions in a steady rhythm that Kevin found almost hypnotic to listen to. 12 Kreth supply vessels were destroyed in the first 4 minutes. The human force had not lost a single ship. Then the Kreth answered. The response came from the front of the formation. Warships that had not been visible on the initial scan because they were positioned behind the larger assembly ships. They were fast, faster than the Varec files had suggested, and there were more of them than Owen's model had predicted. 43 vessels swung out from the formation in a practiced movement, spreading wide to either side, curving around toward the human force in a classic encirclement, a wall of ships closing from the front, 2 arms reaching around the sides. Kevin watched it happen on his formation screen. He watched the gap closing. He counted the ships. He keyed his line to the bridge and said, in a very level voice, "General, we have 43 Kreth warships forming an encirclement. Left arm, 21 vessels. Right arm, 18. 4 coming straight at us down the center." "I see them," Mira said. She sounded the same as she always sounded, calm, present, thinking. On the Varec support frigates, both crews had already begun preparing the signal broadcast that, in Varec protocol, indicated a request for terms. It was not surrender exactly. It was a formal military signal that meant we recognize the tactical situation and are open to discussion. It had saved Varec lives in the past when positions became impossible. Mira's voice came over the joint channel before either Varec frigate could broadcast. "I do not send that signal." A pause. "I need both frigates on my right flank, full thrust. Owen, plot me a line through the center of the encirclement. Maximum thrust. Full railgun spread on both flanks as we go through." There was a moment of silence from the Varec frigates. Then one of them came through on the channel. "General Vance, the encirclement is nearly complete. The standard response in this situation is not what we're doing," Mira said. "Flank position, full thrust. Now." The Varec frigates moved. What happened in the next 11 minutes was something that no Varec analyst who reviewed the sensor data afterward could fully explain in the context of their existing understanding of battle tactics. The 6-ship human force did not try to break out of the encirclement through a gap at the edges, which would have been the logical response to a closing ring. They accelerated directly toward the center of the ring, toward the densest part of the Kreth formation, at maximum speed, with every weapon firing outward on both sides simultaneously. The Kreth ships on the left and right arms of the encirclement had been moving inward, toward where the human ships had been. When the humans accelerated straight through the center, the Kreth ships on both arms were now firing across each other's paths. 3 Kreth vessels were destroyed by their own formation's fire before the human ships had traveled a quarter of the way through. 2 more collided, trying to adjust their angles. The human ships were moving so fast and firing so continuously that the Kreth center vessels had no time to calculate a response before the humans were already past them and punching out the far side of the formation. The whole thing lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, the human force had lost 1 engine pod on the rear ship, suffered 17 injuries across all 6 vessels, and destroyed 9 Kreth warships, plus the 12 supply vessels from the opening pass. 21 Kreth vessels total, in 11 minutes, with 6 ships. Kevin sat in the secondary operations room and stared at his formation screen for a long time after it was over. The Kreth ships that remained were pulling back and regrouping. They were not pursuing. He noted that. He noted it carefully and wrote it in his log. Because a thing that had never happened in 2 years of war, a Kreth force pulling back and pausing, seemed like the kind of detail that should be written down. Soren Ka's voice came through on the channel. The old Varric admiral had been watching the entire engagement from the unyielding March's bridge, and when it finally spoke, it did not sound like a military commander delivering an assessment. It sounded like something between awe and confusion, a sound that its translator rendered imperfectly but clearly enough. "Commander Vance, what are you?" Mira keyed the channel open. On the secondary operations screen, Kevin could see the feed from the main bridge, Mira standing at the front viewport, the cold light of the corridor outside on her face, her hands behind her back. She looked out at the Kreth ships regrouping in the distance for a moment before she answered. "We're the ones you called," she said. Kevin looked down at his log. He finished writing his entry about the Kreth pulling back. Then he added one more line at the bottom. "I think they understand something now that they did not understand this morning. I think we do too." He closed the log and started helping Owen compile the weapons data from the engagement, because the work was not done. It was never done. That was in some ways exactly the point. In the 6 weeks that followed the Battle of Vel Moran, the war changed. Not all at once. Not in any single dramatic moment. It changed the way a tide changes, slowly at first, and then in a way that was impossible to ignore. Mira Vance did not wait to be given sectors to defend. She studied the war map the way a person studies a problem they intend to solve, and she reorganized the human contingent into 7 small strike groups, each one led by a human officer and paired with a Varric unit. She gave each group the same core instruction, which she wrote out in plain language and read to every team leader personally. Find the enemy where they are gathering, hit them before they finish gathering, and do not stop moving. She told them that the worst thing they could do was sit in one place long enough for the Kreth to build a response around them. She told them to be the problem, not the target. The strike groups went out and did exactly that. Over 6 weeks, they hit 14 Kreth assembly points, destroyed 3 supply lines, and then disrupted 2 major offensive pushes that the Varric intelligence team had predicted would reach Varric-held worlds within weeks. They lost people. That was true, and it was real, and nobody pretended otherwise. 6 soldiers did not come back from a raid on a Kreth fuel depot in the 3rd week. 3 more were badly wounded in the 4th. Mira read every name. She did not make speeches about them, because she did not think speeches were what those people would have wanted. She held short, quiet gatherings for the people who had known them, and then she went back to work, because the only way to make those losses mean something was to finish the job. The Varric units embedded with the human strike groups began to change. It happened gradually, but Kevin noticed it. And the Varric soldiers, who had arrived at the beginning of the joint operation following their standard protocols, moving carefully and conservatively, always keeping an eye on the retreat corridors, started watching their human officers differently. They started asking questions instead of waiting for orders. They started pointing at maps and suggesting angles of attack that 3 weeks ago they would never have considered. One Varek soldier in Kevin's unit, a young one named Vareth So, who had never spoken more than 10 words at a time in the first 2 weeks, came to Kevin one evening with a hand-drawn diagram of a Kreth patrol pattern and said, very seriously, "I think there is a hole here. I think we can go through it tonight." Kevin looked at the diagram. He took it to Mira. They went through the hole that night and destroyed a Kreth relay station before the patrol cycle completed. Varathso walked back to the ship afterward with a straightness in its posture that had not been there before. Kevin understood that feeling. But the story that spread furthest, the one that the Varek told each other in corridors and mess halls and briefing rooms across the unyielding march, was the story of Sergeant Donna Holt and the depot at Velkara. The Velkara depot was a Kreth logistics hub, a large, ugly structure of dark metal built inside the shell of a dead asteroid, used to store the raw material the Kreth processed into new machines. Taking it would not win the war, but destroying it would slow the Kreth's ability to rebuild their losses in this sector by several months, and Mira wanted those months. She sent Donna's squad in to plant demolition charges and get out. The mission went fine for about 4 hours. Then a Kreth patrol fleet that had not been on any of the intelligence maps came out of transit 200 kilometers away, and suddenly getting out was not as simple as it had looked. Donna had 12 soldiers, a demolished entrance behind her, a Kreth fleet closing off the extraction route ahead of her, and a logistics depot full of things that could be used to make explosives if you knew what you were doing. Donna knew what she was doing. She put her squad into the depot's deepest section, used the Kreth's own fuel cells to build a series of shaped charges around every entrance, and sent a short message back to the unyielding march. "Route is blocked. Holding position. Send extraction when route is clear. Not urgent." Then she put her comm unit in her pocket and got to work. The Kreth sent the first assault wave 8 hours in, 14 units moving through the main entrance. Donna's first charge took out 9 of them. The remaining 5 were handled by her soldiers in the corridor, working in 2-person teams, calm and efficient. Kevin, monitoring from the operations room, read the contact reports as they came in and felt the hair on his arm stand up. Not from fear, but from something that took him a moment to name. It was respect, he decided. Deep and uncomplicated respect. The second wave came at hour 14, larger. Donna had expected that. She had already repositioned her squad and rebuilt the charge points using materials from deeper in the depot. The second wave cost the Kreth more than the first. The third wave, at hour 22, cost them more still, because by then, Donna had rigged 3 of the depot's own storage chambers to blow in sequence, creating a chain of pressure blasts that moved through the entry corridors faster than the Kreth units could retreat from them. At hour 29, the extraction route cleared. The Varek ship sent to retrieve the squad entered the depot and found Donna sitting on an ammunition crate near the main corridor, eating a ration bar, with her rifle across her knees and her helmet set on the floor beside her. 2 of her soldiers were sleeping against the far wall. The rest were standing or sitting nearby, tired and quiet. The depot around them looked like something very large and very angry had moved through it several times. "About time," Donna said. She stood up, woke the sleeping soldiers. She picked up her helmet and her rifle and walked everyone to the extraction ship with the calm of a person who has finished a job and is ready to go home. The Varek crew on the extraction ship watched them board in total silence. Kevin heard about it from the Varek pilot, who described the scene to 3 different people before the day was over. The story reached Sorenka within hours. The old admiral listened to the full account without interrupting. When the telling was finished, it sat still for a moment and then asked a question that had been sitting at the back of its thoughts for weeks. It called Mira to its command room that evening and asked it directly, What do your people feel when you fight? When things are hard and the situation is bad, what is inside you? Mira was quiet for a long time. She looked at the map on the wall. She looked at the stars outside the viewport. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully, not because she did not know the answer, but because she wanted to give the right one. Responsible, she said finally. We feel responsible. For the people next to us. For the people behind us. For the ones who need this to go right. She paused. That doesn't go away when things get hard. It gets louder. Sorenka looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then it turned back to the map. The next morning, the Varek intelligence team brought Mira a report that no one on their side had ever written before. It described an unusual pattern in the Kreth communication signals from the past 4 days. The Kreth did not have language in the way living creatures did, but they had signals, coordination pulses, assembly commands, the movement directives. The intelligence team had identified something in those signals that they did not have a word for because they had never seen it before in 2 years of war. A Kreth attack column in Sector 7 had stopped, not redirected, not rebuilt, stopped. It sat at the edge of its planned attack route and had not moved in 96 hours. The analysts believed, carefully, with caveats, in the measured language of people who were not sure they were reading this correctly, that the Kreth had calculated something new into their model, something that had not been in their calculations before the humans arrived. The analysts called it, for lack of a better term, an unresolvable resistance factor, a target that their models suggested would not reach a stop point. Mira read the report twice, and then she set it face down on the table and said quietly, "Good. Let them think about it." Kevin wrote in his log that night, "I think something changed today. I think they looked at what we are and ran the numbers and did not like what came out. I don't know if machines can be afraid, but I think they can recognize something that their math cannot get around, and I think we might be that thing." The plan for the final operation took Mira 4 days to build, not because it was complicated, though it was, but because she wanted every piece of it to be right. She did not want to win this engagement and leave a gap behind her. She wanted to end it, or end enough of it that the Kreth in this sector would not be able to rebuild into a serious threat for a very long time. She studied every map, every signal intercept, every movement pattern the Varek had collected in 2 years and the humans had collected in 6 weeks. She asked Owen Cruz to run the numbers 17 times. She asked Donna Holt to walk through the assault plan and find every place it could fail. Donna found 4. Mira fixed 3 of them and accepted the 4th as a risk that could not be removed. The plan was this. The Kreth's ability to coordinate across this sector depended on 3 primary relay nodes, large structures built into dead moons near the edges of their controlled space. The relay nodes were how the distributed machine intelligence of the Kreth communicated across vast distances, kept formation timing synchronized, and processed the constant flow of combat data that allowed them to respond to threats at a fleet level. Destroy the 3 nodes simultaneously, and the Kreth fleet would lose the ability to act as a single coordinated force. They would still exist. They would still be dangerous. But they would be 40 individual vessels making individual decisions instead of one machine mind operating 40 vessels as a single weapon. The window during which that would remain true, before the Kreth could rebuild their network, was estimated at 22 minutes. 22 minutes was enough. Mira would make it enough. The operation required all 12 human vessels and 40 Varek ships working in 3 groups simultaneously. Each group would hit 1 relay node at the same moment. Timing was everything. If one group hit early, the other 2 nodes would immediately boost their signal strength and try to compensate. If one group hit late, the Kreth would begin emergency network restructuring before all 3 nodes were down. All 3 had to go dark within 40 seconds of each other. Soren Ka listened to the full briefing without speaking. When Mira finished, the old admiral looked at the display for a long time. Then it said, "You are asking us to run an operation with a 40-second margin across 3 separate engagements spanning 40 million kilometers of space." "Yes," Mira said. Soren Ka looked at her. "And you believe we can do this?" "I believe we don't have a better option," Mira said. "And yes, I believe we can do this." The old admiral held her gaze for another moment. Then it began assigning ships to groups. Kevin Briggs was assigned to Group 2, the center node. He was not running formation screens this time. Mira had moved him to the assault pod team, the small craft that would approach the node structure directly and place the final charges while the main ships held off the Kreth Guard fleet. He had trained for this. He was ready for this. He sat in the pod bay with his kit on and his rifle in his lap and watched the mission clock count down. And he thought about the long road from a barracks in Colorado to the inside of an assault pod 40 million kilometers from the nearest human world. It was a strange road. He was glad he had walked it. Donna Holt was in the pod next to his. She was eating a ration bar. Kevin stared at her. She looked at him and shrugged. "Might as well," she said. The operation began at exactly the scheduled moment, all 3 groups dropping into position simultaneously from different transit points. Owen Cruz, coordinating weapons targeting across all 4 ships in Group 2 from the lead vessel's bridge, began calling fire solutions before the Kreth Guard fleet had finished reacting to their arrival. The Kreth were fast, but they were reacting, and reacting was slower than acting. Owen understood that. He had learned it from watching Mira. The pod bay doors opened. Kevin and Donna's team went out into the cold between the ships, moving hard toward the relay node structure, a vast, dark shape against the stars, all angles and machinery, built without any thought for how it looked, because the things that built it did not care how things looked. Kevin focused on the approach vector. He focused on the charge placement diagram he had memorized. He focused on his breathing. Nay, he did not look at the Kreth Guard ships fighting the human and Varek fleet 2,000 kilometers behind him, because looking at them would not help him do his job. Group 1 hit its node at 7 minutes and 41 seconds into the operation. Group 2's charges were placed and armed at 7 minutes and 58 seconds. Group 3 hit its node at 8 minutes and 9 seconds. All 3 relay nodes went dark within 28 seconds of each other, 12 seconds inside the margin. Kevin heard the confirmation call from Owen come through his comm as the pod was pulling back toward the ship, and he let out a breath that he had not been aware he was holding. Around him in the pod, the rest of the assault team were quiet, the way people are quiet when a very large and very tense thing has just finished. Donna finished her ration bar and put the wrapper in her pocket. On the main sensor feed, the Kreth fleet across 3 sectors began to fragment. Ships that had been moving in tight coordinated formations drifted apart, changing speed and direction individually, some moving forward and some pulling back, the precise machine unity of their movements dissolving into something that looked, from a distance, almost like confusion. The Varek intelligence team confirmed it within minutes. The Kreth network was down. The distributed intelligence that had made them so effective, so relentless, so impossible to simply outlast, was broken into pieces that could not hear each other. On the bridge of the lead ship, Owen Cruz finished logging the engagement data and set down his stylus. Mira stood at the front viewport, her back to the room, looking out at the broken Kreth formation in the distance. The bridge was very quiet. People were sitting at their stations but not working, just sitting and being still, and letting the moment be what it was. Soren Ka's voice came through the comm. It took a moment to come through, as if the old admiral had been sitting in its own silence first, gathering the words. When it spoke, it did not use military language. It did not give a tactical assessment. It sounded like a person, or the closest thing a Varek admiral could come to sounding like a person, speaking from somewhere unguarded and honest. Commander Vance, Sorenka said. We asked Earth for warriors. We were desperate, and we sent a signal into the dark, and we hoped for soldiers who could fight. What came back? A pause. A long one. But we do not have a word in our language for what came back. We have looked, and we do not have one. Mira turned from the viewport. The cold light from outside was on her face, and she looked tired in the way that people look tired when they have been carrying something very heavy for a long time and have finally put it down. She looked at the comm unit. She thought for a moment. We don't have a clean word for it either, she said. We just call it not quitting. In the weeks that followed, the Varek Collective began the long work of rebuilding. The 3 worlds that had been lost were gone and could not be recovered, and that was a weight that the Varek carried and would carry. But the 4 that had been under threat were safe. The Kreth in this sector were broken and scattered, and the Varek now had the maps, the models, and the confidence to keep them that way. Sorenka reorganized the entire Varek military command structure around the principles it had learned in 6 weeks of watching Mira Vance operate. It did not ask permission to do this. It simply did it, because the war had made the answer obvious. The Varek Collective sent a formal message to Earth 3 weeks after the operation. It was addressed to Commander Dale Owens. It invited humanity to join the collective, not as a hired force, not as a military asset, but as a full member, an equal, a species whose place at the table had been earned in the cold between stars. Dale read the message in his office in Colorado. He read it twice, put it face down on his desk, and stared at the ceiling.